Okay, we are live and welcome to Nerd Church. And it's Thursday. And, I would really like to be listening to a happy little video where someone discovers Greek Orthodox liturgical music for the first time. And maybe one day we'll get to do that. But that day is not today. Because the SSPX is continuing to go into schism. And last week, we kind of went over the historical background of that and kind of what's going on right now. And today, to sort of sum up what's going on until, July, when something's actually going to happen, I thought that rather than trying to fairly present um, the arguments of the people who are supporting the SSPX, because I don't think that I am capable of articulating their points of view in a way that is fair to them, and also in a way that will not cause people who are unfamiliar with the word, with the absolute like alternate reality that a lot of these people live in. Like, I don't want people to think that I'm just making this up. So I decided the best way to do that was to find some sort of representative traditional Catholic videos from people who support the SSPX and let them speak in their own words. So our first one, oh, by the way, Dapper was supposed to join us, but the dinosaur is 145 million years old, and sometimes he needs a nap. So it's just me and Aldo today. Today, most of the videos I picked are fairly short, but the one we're starting out with is from this guy named Believing Thomas. I couldn't find out very much about him other than what he says about himself in the video, except that he is apparently living in Jerusalem for reasons that he doesn't explain in this video. And it's a very small YouTube channel, but it's still bigger than us. 35 subscribers. Yay! Anyway, we almost have 4,000 views total. So anyway, so we are going to start with Believing Thomas, who lives in Jerusalem. So at least, while we're listening to him talk, we at least get to see nice background footage of the old city in Jerusalem, which is nice. Okay, so we're just waiting for things to load. Okay, so here we go. And of course, YouTube is being slow.
And welcome to Jerusalem.
Okay.
And today, here we are just outside of Damascus Gate. That's the gate right behind me. Just entered the Holy City, going to an Eastern Rite Mass today. And today I'm going to talk about why the SSPX is right to do what it does with consecrating bishops, even without papal mandate, why this is necessary from a biblical and historical perspective. So, for starters, for those who are aware of the situation, the SSPX does consecrate bishops without papal mandate and is probably going to do so again within the next 2 years. Would be my personal guess. The reason that they're doing this is because the mainline Catholic Church has gone super woke. I've attended masses here, and I've attended a Novus Ordo masses here in Jerusalem. Excuse me one moment. There's a truck going by here.
Okay, well, he's waiting for the truck to go by. Um, I just want to point out that as some people are fond of saying with young Earth creationists, that it's possible to be it's possible to be well informed, honest, or let's see, it's well informed, honest, or it's possible to be honest or well informed, but not both. Um, there's a third one that I'm blanking on right now. This guy may be honest, but he is not well informed. Because you notice he thinks that the SSPX consecrating bishops without permission is just something that he can do, that they do, all the time for fun. And he also thinks it's going to happen sometime in the next couple years, he guesses, when they've announced they're doing it on July 4th. Also, Aldo,
Mm-hmm.
based on just your perspective as a cultural Catholic, if you had to describe one word, if you had to think of one word in English to describe the current Catholic Church, would it be super woke?
I don't think so.
Yeah, yeah, like insanely liberal is not a word that I associate with Catholicism.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a holy city, but it's a living city. But yeah, the SSP, the S, even here in Jerusalem, I've seen cases of woke Catholic thoughts, even among supposedly traditional priests who say the traditional Latin Mass. So, for example, I met priests of the Priestly Fraternity of St. Peter, who deny doctrines like EENS. Ecumenism is practiced well across the board here. And I don't just mean an ecumenism of love thy neighbor, let's learn about each other. I'm all for that. I do that myself. But active participation in each other's worship, communicatio in sacris, it's hugely promoted here. So that's just across the board. It's dressed up a lot more nicely here in Jerusalem than in North America or in Europe. That is a problem. That contradicts previous Catholic teaching. Matalam Animos, Pope Pius XI condemned the practice in that decree. It was condemned by the early church fathers who said to stand aloof from heretics.
Okay, I'm going to make a quick plea to anybody in the audience who knows what EENS is, because I haven't been able to figure it out. I just tried Googling it again for fun because I thought he might be saying something different. And I can't figure out what he's talking about, except that it's something to do with ecumenicism.
No.
But also, I want to emphasize that the part that he's complaining about sounds to me like the current practice where occasionally Catholic clergy and Orthodox clergy, and sometimes Anglicans or Lutherans, will hold some kind of a prayer service together, or will even like occasionally be present at each other's religious services, even if they don't take communion. That's what he's griping about, is the idea that is basically the idea that the Greek Orthodox have valid sacraments and valid holy orders. That's his gripe. Which I don't think that any attempt to unite with the Orthodox Church can start from a position of you guys are not real Christians.
Especially those who deny real presence. So that would definitely preclude ecumenism with Protestants. See St. Ignatius of Antioch in his letter to Smyrnians. And to those who say, well, Rome has allowed this, Rome has spoken, case closed. Which time has Rome spoken, case closed? Rome already spoke under Pius the 11th with Mortalemanimus. So apparently that case is not closed. You opened it up again. It is a departure from previous Catholic teaching. There's no two ways about it. That is a sad statement of historical fact. Also, denial of EENS, automatically defined in unum sanctum. In Galatians, it says, if anyone should bring to you another gospel, do not hear him.
So basically, this guy seems to be pretty representative of the traditional Catholics who pretty much only acknowledge the councils of Nicaea and Trent and don't listen to any pope like that they don't like. This guy appears to be one of the ones that starts out with that ends with Pius the 11th, who was the pope like basically just before World War II. And you know, it's like, yeah, the teachings of the Catholic Church change and they keep changing. You know, you can't just put the brakes on at like whatever year you think is good and you know, okay, well, that's it. We're not going further anymore. We're not ever going to change from this point. You know, and yeah, certainly things can change, but but that doesn't mean that you just get to, I'm sorry, I'm becoming incoherent. my brain is melting.
Galatians 1 verses 6 through 9. Yet we are now told that Protestant sects are just as good for salvation as the Catholic Church. Okay, why be Catholic? Why have confession? Why communion? Why even bother obeying the Pope of Rome? If that's the case, like I would have to be mad to be. I'd have to be insane to be a Catholic.
Katie, could you please pause the video?
Yeah, I just paused it.
Okay, so it seems that I'm not sure if you found the same information as me, but EENS is Latin for extra ecclesiam nulla salus, which means church, there is no salvation.
Oh, okay. I hadn't ever heard that as oh, okay, thank you. Thank you. I had never found that as an acronym before. Okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Yeah. So now so I just want to take a minute to reflect on what he said, right? Because he just said, if it was possible to be saved, if I thought it was possible to be saved outside of the Catholic Church, I wouldn't be Catholic. I'd just like go off and like be a Baptist or something because it's easier. I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like a really good argument. you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, I mean, s- like, I mean, like, like, although I know that you're not really practicing at this point, but do you have like any particular desire to go be something else?
Not really.
Yeah.
So,
And I mean, like, if you were to suddenly decide, oh, I'm going to be religious again, what would you do?
mm, well, actually, I would convert to Judaism.
Well, yeah, okay. Well, you'd convert to Judaism, but
Mm,
same thing, right?
mhm.
Again, you would be taking on a whole bunch of rules and I mean, like, much more so than you do now, right?
Right,
Like, much more than you would have as a Catholic. So, like, you would take on a higher level of religious observance and daily responsibility and daily activity, right?
right.
Or, like, for me, I'm Catholic. I'm happy being Catholic. It took me
Mhm.
a really long time to get back to the point where I could say I'm Catholic and I'm happy being Catholic. But I'm not doing it because I'm afraid that if I'm not Catholic, I'll go to hell. And I would like to suggest that anybody who is Catholic out of fear needs to find a better reason to be Catholic. And if your pitch to people that you're trying to get to be Catholic is submit to Rome so you don't go to hell, that's a bad argument for being Catholic. Like, and that's something that I come to with a lot of these, like, people that are traditional Catholics, that are like, oh, like, everybody needs to be Catholic the same way that I am. It's like, tell me what you love about being Catholic, right? That's what I always want to ask people like this guy, right? Like, what do they like about being Catholic? Like, what's pulling them in, or are they just there being miserable and they want everybody else to be miserable?
The only thing I can think of is this ancient earlier notion of religion where you were born inside a religion, for example, in the Greek or the Roman religions, and you were not supposed to convert to any other religion. Yeah, for example, during the New Testament period, uh, Greeks or Romans could offer sacrifices in the Jerusalem temple, but not they were not converting to Judaism. They were just expanding their pantheon to
Right.
put it
Yeah,
in a
exactly.
way.
Yeah. But like with this guy, it's like it's even weirder than that because he's fine with people coming in,
Mhm.
right? But he doesn't want to have any kind of reaching out or acknowledgement of anything that they're doing that is already good.
Mhm.
And it's just it's ridiculous.
To do all that. Pardon me, we're on the Via Dolorosa now. It is pitch black. Uh, because a lot of the shops are not open, and it's early in the morning. You can get a better look down there where we're walking towards. But biblically speaking, all this is nonsense from a patriotic perspective. First of all, let's look at it from the church fathers' perspective.
Yes,
Because, I can take scripture, it can be twisted. I can do that whether even inadvertently, so it's possible. So let's look what the church fathers had to say about how to handle situations like this. For starters, if you have a teacher who is
um for I just want to quickly mention that when he's talking about the church fathers, he's basically talking about people in the second and third century. going into like the very beginning of the 4th century, just, for people who aren't familiar with their church history to get their timeline. Um, and I really have a problem with him saying, oh yeah, scripture can be unclear, but the church fathers, you can just read that and not have to do any work. Because although, I mean, yes, they present their arguments very nicely and very clearly, but also, these are people of a particular time and a particular place. And you have to understand that, the 3rd century Mediterranean is not today. And if you're trying to map one onto the other, it does not work.
And the other problem with that is that I see in a sense similar to rabbinic Judaism in the sense that they are each church father has his own opinion, and we have people who were excluded from this group, or the church is just adopting the different church fathers in a selective way.
Right.
Yet they have different opinions. They belong, as you said, in different areas and different places. So this guy is just like leveling the ground, trying to make us believe that the church fathers they have just one discourse and one opinion, which is not true.
Absolutely. And also, you run into situations like, Origen and Tertullian, enormously influential, but some of their positions, you know, ended up becoming were declared heretical.
Right.
So it's no, and then you have like people like, my boy Gregory of Nyssa,
Mm-hmm.
who who comes up with apostasis, which is very, very close to universal salvation, and almost gets declared a heretic because of it. Like apostasis is like about as far as you can go and not get in serious trouble. So it's like you can't just say, whereas there are other church fathers who are very much, no salvation outside of the church. And Gregory opens up the door for it being broader than that. So you can't just say, oh, the church fathers, because they're not a monolith, and they were beefing with each other
Mm-hmm.
just as much.
Teach the faith, who is not teaching the faith, you're not to hear them. You're not to go along with them. That was what it explicitly says in the Didache. It is also the practice of St. Maximus the Confessor. So for those.
Okay. When he's talking about the Didache is our earliest document on basically the organization of the church. The Didache did not make it into the canon. So the Didache isn't scripture. It could have been scripture, but it wasn't. So like when you're making your argument, citing the Didache is really about up there with like citing the Shepherd of Hermas. And it's also worth pointing out that the church fathers were very much working in a period where there was no canon. There was no pope in the sense that we have a pope today. There weren't bishops in the sense that there are bishops today. Cardinals did not exist as a concept yet. So when the church fathers are saying, make sure you're going into a Catholic church instead of an Arian church, we should be hearing that as make sure that you're going into a Catholic church as opposed to a Greek Orthodox church or as opposed to a Protestant church. It's just a completely, it's a world in which Catholic barely exists as a word. Catholic still just means universal. So to try to map that onto this current situation within the Catholic Church doesn't make sense. The argument that he's making only makes sense if you think that the church encompasses all Christians. And he doesn't. He thinks the church only encompasses Catholics.
You don't know, St. Maximus Confessor is accurately quoted as a church father who believed in the papacy and defended it, which he did. He was an Eastern priest, recognized the authority of the Pope of Rome. However, he disobeyed him, knowingly, saying, well, yes, Honorius said this, but he wasn't really condemning. He was a kind of a bit of a Pope explainer, honestly. But he actively, knowingly preached against the Monoclete heresy, even after Pope Honorius I told people not to do so. And he was persecuted, became a martyr because of his disobedience to Pope Honorius I. There are actually an actual saint who was canonized because he disobeyed.
Okay, Pope Honorius was Pope during one of the periods where there was a whole lot of theological beef going on between the Greek Orthodox Church, or rather, between the Patriarch of Constantinople and the Pope. And like getting into the whole like Orthodox Catholic split is way beyond the scope of what we're doing now, but it is parallel to the current situation in that you have the Pope saying, I'm the Pope, you, the Patriarch of Rome, that you, the Patriarch of Constantinople, need to listen to me. And the head of the SSPX saying, but I should be in charge. You don't understand. You're the heretic.
Because he's literally saying because he recognized the Pope and knowingly disobeyed him. That is his claim to fame to sainthood.
And also, Honorius was the one who got dug up and tried for heresy. They decide the reason why that guy's a saint is because the church decided that Honorius went too far in trying to keep the peace with the Byzantines, or sorry, the Eastern Roman Empire. And so so they basically said, okay, we're going to invalidate what Honorius said, and we're going to stick with the previous line. So if we're continuing his analogy, this would be like Pope Leo deciding to embrace the SSPX, give them everything that they want, and then the next guy says, no, that was a mistake, we're not going to do that. If we're going to continue with the analogy, his analogy's broken.
So there is historical precedent for it. It's not something you do just willy-nilly, obviously, but there is historical precedent for it. Now, biblically speaking, there is plenty of biblical cases where you have an authority figure who's working against God, and to save your life or your soul, you have to disobey. So I'll give an example. So for starters, I will give because we're in Jerusalem, That's right there is the Holy Church, Holy Sepulchre right in front of us. We'll pass through. One of the prime examples of this would be King David. King David, for those of you who aren't, we're all aware of the story of how he fought against Goliath and later became king, but he also had to openly disobey the king of Israel. So King Saul became jealous of King David and tried to kill him. David had to flee, and he was called a false Israelite. They called him go serve other gods. That was one of his complaints, the complaints that King David made. He also, he was also accused of being a robber and abandoned by his own people. Read the account of how he lived in the hold, as it was called in those times. He was in exile. He had to even flee on the land of the Philistines. That was a huge complaint about him. And after the second time Saul tried to take his life, even though Saul asked him to come back, even after David proved to him he wasn't trying to kill him, David declined Saul's offer. So just because Rome is making overtures to the SSPX and Catholic tradition, this doesn't mean we should accept. We need to be prudent about it. If they have not changed, Leo XIV is making some moderate change.
Would you care to offer your opinion on his analogy about David and Saul, in which the SSPX is David and Pope Leo, I think, is Saul in this analogy?
Well, you think whenever I hear of these kind of comparisons, I get extremely suspicious. So this guy is obviously trying to, to manipulate the narrative, in my opinion. And well, to start with, this is between between rulers. This isn't about just the church. So it is different, if not more complicated, in the sense that those were different times. Well, we're talking about maybe even fictional characters
Yeah.
historically.
Yeah,
And
or if, well, I mean, at this point, we're pretty sure there was a historical David,
mhm,
but all of the details that we have about his life, I think
correct,
it's fair to say, are legendary and pretty
legendary,
clearly,
expanded, or
yeah, yeah,
created.
yeah.
So he's
So
in some way romanticizing the idea of using the figures of David and Saul to communicate his message.
yes, exactly. And, again, it's like they want to argue for the authority of the church, but they only want to grant the church authority to the extent that the church agrees with them.
Mhm,
And I'm not sure how that works.
exactly.
Probably not very well, but we'll find that out on July 4th.
Changes for the better. But fiducia supplicans, oh my gosh, ecumenism is still running rampant. We as Catholic faithful tradition must hold the line. Because unless there's a change of
For the benefit of anybody who is not up on their current papal encyclicals, which is, most people really. Fiducia Supplicans is the document that Pope Francis put out, which authorized special blessings and admittance to communion on a case-by-case basis for Catholics for both divorced and remarried Catholics, as well as civilly married same-sex couples. And the trads didn't like that at all.
because unless there's a major change, it would be putting ourselves in spiritual danger. That's just the reality. That is the unhappy reality of the matter. So anyway, let me just fill in there. See the Church of Holy Sepulchre. I'll be praying there a little bit later today.
But at least we get to see inside
right
the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
That's Golgotha
cool.
right there. And that is behind those doors is the entrance to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Crusader kings are buried here who fought for the faith, literally, physically fought. Something that Vatican II Catholics are now quite ashamed of, but we, as a Tricath, I'm proud of that spiritual legacy.
I think that we just ran across a crusade apologist. I'm trying to say what I think about crusade apologists in a way that is not just me spewing profanity for about 30 minutes. The first, okay. The first crusade may well have been launched because of genuine concerns about the treatment of Christian pilgrims. However, it very, very quickly turned into a destructive war of conquest that involved, among other things, the sack of Constantinople, which was, let us not forget, a Christian city that probably contributed to the Crusades, also probably contributed to the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire. And Crusaders had a really lovely habit of, while they were marching to the Holy Land, just killing any random Jews that they happened to encounter while they were marching across Europe. John Paul II issued a formal apology for the conduct of Catholic soldiers during the Crusades. There is no excuse for any Catholic or any human being in this year of grace, 2026, to ever apologize for the Crusades. Ever. And I would like this man to consider that as a believing Catholic, he believes that he is going to have to stand in front of God and explain why the Crusades were okay, actually, including the massacre of innocent women and children. Okay. Do you have anything to add?
No, not really. I mean, so what I see is this person is really, as I told you, he sees all of this, the church history, the historical events. He tries to romanticize them in a way that just back up his vision. Of course, he's
Yeah.
perhaps knowingly or unknowingly romanticizing them, or perhaps he honestly doesn't know. He ignores the facts, or he's willingly,
Yeah.
changing them for his agenda.
Yeah. Again, it's the question of, is he like, is he just poorly informed, or is he deliberate? Is he poorly informed, or is he dishonest? It is really the only question. I would also point out that being a crusade apologist in Jerusalem is I mean, that's a really good way. I'm pretty sure that the only thing that you could get a lot of Jews that you could get almost 100% of both the Jews and the Muslims in Jerusalem to agree on would be punching that guy in the face.
Mhm.
Wait, that's how we could bring about unity. Hey guys, crusade apologists exist. But of course, the problem with that is that there are a lot of Palestinian Christians who are just like, no, no, we just want to go about our business, and we think the Crusades were horrible too. Because oh yeah, that should be mentioned that when Jerusalem was sacked, Palestinian Christians died.
Mhm.
A Catholic faithful tradition, we have to fight. That's the fact of the matter. Now, I know there's a lot of Catholics going to watch this. They're going to say, oh, but Romans spoken praise, so Leo 14 is wonderful. Pope Francis didn't really mean to let us think the Catholics with fiducious disciplines. He did. I have basic reading skills. I've actually had one guy tell me it's not that bad in Jerusalem. I've seen ecumenism in Jerusalem. It's the same heresy as back at home in Canada, just dressed up more nicely. That's the fact. I have read fiducious disciplines. I have basic reading skills. I've even had one guy try to tell me, oh, it's not that bad. How do I know this? Because I Googled, got an AI, he told me that it's okay. These people who do not want to see what's going on lack basic reading skills. Now, why not just go Orthodox or Protestant? Well, because of Matthew 16, 18 through 19. Moment. Again, living city.
So he's okay with living in a living city, but not okay with living in a living church. Great.
Yeah, and that paper is Roman payment by recall correctly. So I don't think it gives some kind of price. I don't know. Paper. Oh.
Okay, can I just say that I am a little bit jealous that he actually is like in Jerusalem getting to like walk on Roman pavement? Because like, you know, like I live in I live in a city that was founded in 1885. Right. Now, not to say that we don't have like old stuff to go look at. Like we actually have that, like there are actually medieval ruins, like not very far from my house, that were built by the Hohokam. And actually there's a working canal about a block that way that was originally built by the Hohokam that's still in use, which is still pretty cool. But still, it's not Roman era pavement. So I just want to take, you know, of course you get to go and like look at Aztec pyramids like whenever you feel like it. So
Yeah.
I'm jealous of you too. I just like old buildings.
Me too.
Sorry, the reason I don't believe in the papacy is because it's not in the Bible. Matthew 16, 18 through 19. You're Peter, Thomas Rock, the only church that gets it will not prevail against it. We have church fathers like St. Cyprian of Carthage, who even with his, though he's had a spat with the Pope, and debate him still recognize the office in principle, as did St. Irenaeus of Leon, his work against heresy. The 2nd century, disciple of a disciple, one of the 12 apostles. The papacy and they held it as an integral part of the Catholic faith. They did not believe it was an optional extra, which, if ecumenists are right, papacy is an optional extra. I'm good as an SSPXer, or even as a Steve, because hey, if belief in the papacy is an optional extra, if you can be saved without believing in the institution at all, as a matter of principle, then you can be clearly you can be saved for not.
I just want to say that that is actually kind of a misrepresentation of the Catholic Church's position on ecumenicism. It's basically the idea that, like, okay, people who aren't Catholic are basically going to be judged according to like whatever rules that you know, like God will understand, okay, you know, you weren't raised Catholic, you know, but you tried to be a good person, you know, you you know, you know, you're a Christian, but you're not Catholic. Okay. Do you believe in God? Do you love your neighbor as yourself? You're probably okay, right? But if you're Catholic, you like Pope Leo the 14th still believes that Catholicism is the best, and that Catholics who know better are going to be judged as though we're Catholics who know better. Now, maybe this guy can get himself off of the hook by, in his mind, by claiming not to know any better. But if I were somebody who, you know, believed that it was that God was like really anxious to, you know, inflict eternal conscious torment on people who disagree with the Pope, I would not be as anxious as he is to disagree with the Pope, even if the Pope is telling me that, you know, we're done with that whole, we're not going to launch a new crusade. Sorry to make you sad, we're not launching a new crusade. Because, you know, I kind of like not having crusades.
Hey, that's through those doors would be the Church of St. John the Baptist is installed. So now they're having a service. You can go to Orthodox churches to pray privately, which I do. I don't go to services, obviously.
Now see this. I just wanted to pause there because it is very like when you get into like the really extreme tradcaths, there are people who would say that he's a heretic because he will go into an Orthodox church to pray but not attend services. And that's like where that whole movement gets really weird and really prone to fracture, is because everybody has like an area where they're willing to compromise and an area where they're not. And they all draw their lines in different places, which is why it's going to be interesting to see if the SSPX can get these, if they do schism, can get all of these groups to stick together, or if the people who are okay with praying in Orthodox churches will get into fights with the people who aren't, or if the people who are okay with Pius XI will get into fights with people who are like, no, Pius X is the last valid pope.
Anyway, yes, there is. The papacy is an integral part of the Catholic faith. I don't get to decide which part of the Catholic faith I keep and don't keep. EENS is being taught, and I cannot look away as it's being rejected by mainline Catholic. Just as I can't ignore the fact that the papacy was taught by the Church Fathers and in the Bible. We're told the Bible to stand aloof from such heretics. It's not even say so much as God speed you to heresy. You can't do this. It's not allowed. So please, if you're attending the Novus Ordo, please stop. Go to a traditional mass. Go to an SSPX chapel, or call the, if you don't have one, you call up the SSPX. You even get an SSPX mission set up. I've done it before. It's doable. It's a lot of work, and it's a hard fight. But if you want to fight for your communities, freaking SSPX. Even if your parish is going to stand, and let's be honest, a lot of Novus Ordo parishes in the West are collapsing. And even if they do stand up, if they're teaching.
Okay, the whole Novus Ordo parishes in the West are collapsing is something that you hear a lot, especially from American Catholics, particularly American Catholics who are based in the Midwest and the Northeast. And what actually has happened is that the United States of America is a very large country, and it has been like continuously urbanizing, and people have been moving out of the Northeast and Midwest to the Southeast and Southwest because, well, snow sucks. So what that means is that, like, okay, Pope Leo and I have one thing in common. The parish church that we were baptized in no longer exists. In his case, that was because because basically his neighborhood, all of the Catholics moved out into the suburbs. And in Southern Illinois, where my family was from, pretty much everybody like moved to Arizona or California. So I'm still Catholic. Leo's still Catholic, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I don't know. Is the Pope Catholic? This seems to be a question that people are debating, but neither one of us lives in Illinois. You know, and in fact, the diocese that I live in is the second biggest diocese in the US. 50 years ago, we weren't even a blip. Like, we didn't even become we just now, like, we only recently even became a diocese. So it's like they're looking at, so it's like a bunch of, like, you know, people in rural areas complaining about demographics. Now, it's true, you know, that also just in general, religiosity is declining. And, you know, I would like to suggest that part of the reason why is because there's, you know, people like this guy who, when basically given the choice between obeying the Pope and continuing to be a bigot, would rather continue to be a bigot.
Heresy? It's not the real Catholic faith. You're not building the house of God. Anyway, God bless. Have a great.
And he's about to start praying. And since I'm pretty sure that is the literal definition of someone taking the name of the Lord in vain, I'm going to stop. Now, this next one I want to play just because he's explaining he's explaining John Henry Weston, who is a Canadian commentator. He runs LifeSite News. LifeSite is I'm just going to let it play so we're get past his dramatic intro. But LifeSite News is like this big Canadian anti-abortion group. And John Henry Weston has put up a petition asking the College of Cardinals to consider the possibility that both Pope Francis and Pope Leo were actually anti-popes, and that they should maybe consider appointing a new and better pope. So let's hear the argument. Now, the person who's making this argument is not John Henry Weston. This is this guy named Anthony Stein, who is a like moderately popular tradcath YouTuber based in Oklahoma. Where, as he often points out, he has to drive 4 hours every day, every Sunday, to get to a traditional Latin Mass. It takes me about 15 minutes to walk to church because I go to my closest parish, which is what I'm supposed to do because I'm good. So yeah, hey, look, I spent like the first 20 years of my life being told that I'm a really terrible Catholic. So if I occasionally get to say that I'm more Catholic than thou, I just let me have this. Okay. Oh, sorry, he's muted.
You might find this one a step too far for some people. And it's very simple. He is asking the cardinals to consider the possibility that Pope Francis and Pope Leo were actually anti-pope heretics. He's not declaring that they are. He's petitioning those who have the most hierarchical authority in the church outside of the Roman pontiff to examine the question of whether Bergoglio and Prevost aren't popes, were never popes, that they are anti-pope heretics. I'm not a big believer in petitions because I don't think they get you anywhere. I've seen very, very few petitions actually accomplish much of anything in the church anymore. But here I will show you this because it's the more attention you bring to it, the more likely, at least when the cardinals will look at it. So he published this to LifeSite. And I want to remind you, when they tried to can Mr. Weston, one of the things that they cited against him was essentially things like this. So he's taking a big risk here, a big personal risk to address this question. Under the headline, petition to cardinals, can we consider the possibility that Francis and Leo are anti-popes? Whereas previous popes may have led grievously sinful lives, they didn't alter church teaching in official documents. With Francis, all that changed. Now, I would beg to differ just a little bit here. Documents from Vatican II have clear contradictions to teachings from the church from before Vatican II. You'll find it on religious liberty is the easiest one to go to, which says quite literally the opposite of what Pius IX said on the matter. And Benedict XVI, when he was just Father Joseph Ratzinger, called Vatican II the anti-syllabus of errors, that it was undoing Pius IX's syllabus of errors. So yeah, you can find examples where the post-Vatican II popes contradicted things that were said and done and taught by pre-conciliar popes. But his general question is true.
So you notice that even this guy, when because Anthony Stein's whole thing is that basically like Vatican II was a major rupture in the church, but even he can't completely agree with Weston, when Weston is arguing that the teaching of the church has always been perfectly consistent on everything from like Peter, and then all of a sudden we get to like Paul the Sixth and everything goes to hell, is basic. Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. It's illogical to think about that. He's going back to this. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to keep going with this idea, but he's just romanticizing something which an idea which doesn't hold water, at least in my mind.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like they'll defend people who criticize the Pope without like looking at, well, why were they doing that?
Mhm.
And also I'm sorry, but there are some things when you're just asking questions. I mean, like if you know walk up, it's like the saying, like if you ask someone, when did you stop beating your wife, right? You're assuming that that's a legitimate question that could actually be asked of that person. Like, just to ask the question, is Leo an anti-pope, is an insult, in my opinion. I don't know of any other way to interpret that.
Or at least the proposition isn't a problem, because he's asking those who in theory have the authority to do so to consider the very possibility, not to declare them as such, just to examine this, to see that Francis and Leo
I'm just asking questions.
Here's what Mr. Weston had to say. There is a clear and definitive break in the papal line after Pope Benedict XVI. That is his opening salvo. Sounds like he's taking a Benny Plenist position. Benny Plenists are the ones who think that Pope Benedict XVI, either his resignation was invalid, either because he tried to keep the munus and ministerium separate or something, or he tried to, or that he was coerced in some way, thus nullifying the validity of it according to canon law, or a few other hypotheses. But essentially, that Benedict XVI was the last valid pope, and that Francis was an anti-pope for any number of reasons that you care to think. And now, as many others are starting to do, Mr. Weston is extending that to Leo, because he's declaring here a disjunction, a break, in his word, definite break.
So for those playing along at home, we've had one tradcath who accepts all popes up to Pius XI, and then we've got another tradcath who is willing to accept Benedict XVI as a valid pope.
So that only
went up to Benedict XVI and since.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No worries. So what I would say about that is that not even people who try to support the SSPX agree on what they believe regarding the papacy.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, all they really agree on is that they want to start burning heretics again, and that and that the mass should be in Latin. That's really all they agree on.
Mm.
Well, heretics and non-Christians. like basically they just want to burn people.
Mm-hmm.
Which I can understand. I mean, like there are times where you just think, like if we could just start setting people on fire again, it would like make life easier. And then you think about it and you realize no, because the problem with setting people on fire is that it's really easy to start and really hard to stop. So
Correct.
we're probably better off following the example of the church fathers and just making like, really salty response videos. Because let's face it, if Tertullian were alive today, or, Origen, or any of those guys would be alive today, they would have a YouTube channel and it would be savage.
Mhm.
Like couldn't you imagine like just like Celsus has a YouTube video attacking Christians and then like Tertullian responds to it?
That would be really fun.
It would be really funny. I've actually seriously thought about like getting permission from like David Litwa
Mhm.
to just have like somebody like playing the role of Tertullian, I mean playing the role of Celsus,
Mhm.
reading all of the translations from Celsus, and then have somebody else just like pause that video and cut in and read Tertullian's response from a translation of Tertullian. And
Mhm.
then ideally you would play that video for a patristic scholar and have them pause and explain the fight. I think that would be fun.
That would be
Unfortunately,
interesting.
unfortunately that would require two men who are willing to play those roles. So but that's my dream. So if anybody has ever wanted to be a voice actor, drop a link in the comments because we have a crazy plan. And yes, I am pausing just for a sanity break because this is
Whereas previous popes may have led grievously sinful lives, they did not alter church teaching and official documents. With Francis, all that changed. Let's ignore the Pachamama idolatry of Francis and Leo's allowance of the James Martin pilgrimage into St. Peter's Basilica, which Bishop Schneider saw as an abomination of desolation entering the holy place, which Christ.
okay. So I guess that means we get to talk about Pachamama and the LGBT pilgrimage to St. Peter's Basilica. The last one is faster. During the Jubilee year, which just ended, like basically every like particular Catholic organization that you would care to name had an organized pilgrimage, including all of the groups that work to advocate for and support LGBTQ Catholics. And so you basically had a whole bunch of people in a moment that healed a lot of religious trauma for a lot of people. Like going through those holy doors and getting all of their sins wiped away. And then Pope Leo had a cardinal say mass for them in St. Peter's Basilica. It was a beautiful moment. And the best moment was, and I can't find a picture of it, was these two guys walk in through St. Peter's Basilica hand in hand, and one of them is wearing a backpack that on the back says "fuck the rules." And like, which is another way of saying, the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Arguably. This guy would disagree. Schneider would disagree. But that was what was going on. Now, Pachamama is okay. There have been various efforts to come up with Catholic liturgies that make sense for Indigenous people living in the Amazon. And a bunch of Indigenous Amazonian Catholics went to Rome And they had decorated the altars with these like little carved statues of indigenous women that could also symbolize Pachamama, which basically it's roughly equivalent to our idea of like Mother Earth, where, you know, in the same way that like historically Gaia was truly worshipped as a goddess, you know, Pachamama has been worshipped as a goddess, and people who are working on evangelization in the Amazon have said, okay, well, you know, if instead of saying Pachamama is a goddess, just think of Pachamama as like the earth, right? And that's okay. And that's a compromise that has worked really well. And the trads who want to accuse, who think that everything is idolatry, had a fit about it. In fact, Taylor Marshall actually hired goons to like to steal the statues of Pachamama and throw them in the Tiber. It was bad. Formal apologies were issued. Francis was very much not happy. And no one has ever forgotten about it. Like, I'm pretty sure that that there is some trad YouTube channel that brings up Pachamama at least like once a day. Like you could have an entire channel devoted to Pachamama debunking if you wanted to, and I don't want to, because they're silly people being very silly.
It's mentioned as a sign of the end times in Matthew 24. Let's ignore Francis saying all religions are pathways to God, and Leo telling the Anglicans with their James we are already one. Let's ignore Francis and Leo both giving audiences to the world's most notorious James Martin promoting priest, James Martin. Let's ignore the Vatican-China deal struck under Francis and upheld under Leo, where the Chinese Communist Party is able to name bishops on the underground church and their bishops are persecuted. Let's ignore Pope Leo's appointment of many bishops who support women's ordination and celebrate James Martin masses. Let's focus on only one official teaching documents which are contrary to the faith. Are we now to believe in blessing for the James Martin? Explicitly encourages. The spirit of fiducia supplicans is amply condemned.
I'm going to let this run, not because I want to platform him, but just because I want people to hear the anger in his voice, because what he's saying is the institutional hierarchy of the Catholic Church is doing all of this stuff, and including appointing bishops. And the thing is that bishops are where you get cardinals from, and cardinals are where you get popes from. So when he's appointing bishops who are okay with ordaining women, potentially, and are okay with rights for LGBTQ people, that is, you know, that's basically him saying, I don't like the fact that my side is being told we are wrong. And given the choice between being a bigot and obeying the Pope, I'm going to be a bigot. I don't know. I mean, I kind of like the idea that I can not be a bigot and obey the Pope. Because, you know, I remember in the 80s being told that I had to be a bigot in order to obey the Pope. Now I don't have to pick. And I really kind of like that. And, you know, maybe try not being a bigot sometimes. Yeah, okay. But I think that we get the idea. We don't need to listen to him gripe about the 20th century
Do you
having
affirm that the
happened.
Novus Ordo is the sole legitimate expression of the Roman Rite, endorsing the severe restrictions on the traditional Latin Mass as decreed in Traditionis Custodes, the subsequent rescript, and rigorously enforced under Leo? Finally, are we now to deprive Our Lady, the Mother of God?
And again, the reason why the traditional Latin Mass got more restricted again was because they realized that it was putting people in contact with schismatics, that it was giving aid and comfort to the SSPX. It's like that, dude, there are reasons for this.
For titles of co-redemptrix and mediatrix of all graces, both proclaimed by saints and popes, as the document promulgated under Leo has demanded of us. Has not Jesus sent his Holy Mother to warn us of the apocalypse?
Oh, okay, like co-redemptrix and mediatrix of all graces are titles that have never officially been granted. Like some people have used them informally in documents. And, Tuco, friend of the show, issued a document basically saying, don't use those words because, they're not helpful. They cause people to misunderstand Catholic doctrine and they kind of freak Protestants out. So maybe don't do that. But people who are trying to get people angry at the Pope are like gonna throw a fit about that.
Apostasy. Did Our Lady of La Salette, an approved apparition, tell us that Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of Antichrist? Our Lady of La...
Okay, Our Lady of La Salette, if you believe the prophecy that was like reported by the kid, and also this was like little bitty kids, right? And they were apparently claiming that like the Antichrist was going to be a French prince who was going to launch his wars of conquest in the 1870s. Now, although I'm not as up on my French history as I probably should be, but do you remember reading anything in school about the Antichrist reigning in France in the 1870s?
Not really.
Yeah. So I think it's fair to say that, like, and also it's worth mentioning that when the Vatican approves an apparition, what they're saying is you are free to believe this or not. At the moment, we don't see anything going on here that's going to cause a problem. And those approvals can and have been rescinded if the people around the apparition start getting really culty and weird. And, now La Salette, to the point that the average Catholic even cares about La Salette, is just, oh yeah, the Virgin Mary showed up and she told people, the next couple hundred years are going to suck. Everybody should pray the rosary a whole bunch. Which, is not a message that most Catholics would disagree with. And, most people, even if they aren't into praying the rosary, if you told somebody in 1850, yeah, the next couple hundred years are going to suck. I mean, that I don't think that even requires divine intervention at that point. So yeah.
Ocelot also told us there would be 2 worm-ridden popes. The famous stigmatist in France in the same century as La Salette similarly prophesied that there would be 2 successive anti-popes. And if the private revelation is a little too much for you, how about the public revelation?
Now, I just want to say that, like, the whole 2 successive anti-popes thing, it always that's so general that it always puzzles me that that's actually a trad coded prophecy. That's like a prophecy that the trad caths have really seized onto that nobody else has. And I think it's probably because, like, most progressive Catholics don't like to talk about prophecy in public because it's weird. And a lot of us, prefer to just have kind of naturalistic explanations of things. Because if you're going to talk about, okay, there's going to be 2 really bad popes in a row, I mean, there are a lot of people who would say that John Paul and Benedict were a bad pair of popes, and worm ridden could refer to the fact that they both have Parkinson's disease, or also you have the pair of Pius the 11th and Pius the 12th who got into bed with Hitler and Mussolini, not in that order. And, a lot of people, and, maybe it would have made a difference, maybe it wouldn't have, but things would have been different. And I'm not doing that because I'm trying to start, some kind of left-wing conspiracy theory about how, John Paul II and Benedict were the worm-ridden popes of La Salette. I'm doing it to illustrate that you're talking about prophecies that are so general that anybody can say, okay, the 2 popes that I don't like are the bad ones.
It's a very convenient resource to, to be general and, cherry pick whatever you want, which just pushes your message forward.
Yeah, exactly. And, like, I will say that that's actually kind of the main reason why I'm into Marian prophecy.
Mhm.
Not that, like, I ascribe a great deal of significance to any of it, but because, as, like, someone who's interested in the academic study of religion, I think it's really interesting to see how prophecy is currently functioning within the Catholic Church
Mhm.
to give people who don't have a whole lot of institutional power access to institutional power. It's just that in this case, it's the people who, people are using these, like, really, in some cases, just really strange apocalyptic Marian prophecies, some of which have been approved and some of which have not,
Mhm.
to support their point of view.
In the Bible. Christ warned us of many false will arise and lead many astray. The first Pope, St. Peter, warns us of false teachers among you who will secretly introduce destructive heresies. St. Luke warns similarly in Acts, savage wolves will come in among you, even from your own number. The current catechism describes a final trial that will shake the faith, a religious deception at the price of apostasy, and identifies the supreme religious deception as that of the Antichrist. Pope St. John Paul II himself warned us of this 50 years ago in 1976 when he spoke as Cardinal WTF in Philadelphia, quoting future John Paul.
And he was talking about global communism, not liberals in the Catholic Church.
So the problem with using, I mean, not just in this case, but using prophecy or appealing to any kind of religious, esoteric, magical text, or however you want to call them, is that you're just trying to disguise your likes and dislikes, your frustrations, your ideas, and trying to give them this air of authority.
Yes, exactly so.
Community realize this fully. We are now facing the final confrontation between the church and the anti-church, of the gospel versus the anti-gospel. This confrontation lies within the plans of divine providence. It is a trial which the whole church must take up. So he says all that in asking a very simple question. Can we consider the possibility that Francis and Leo are anti-popes? And he asks that question, he poses it to in a form of a petition.
Nope, we can't. We don't need to consider that question. The rest of it, he's going to start praying in just a second, and I don't want to let people take the name of the Lord in vain.
So that just reinforces what I just said some minutes ago, that they are trying to show to present their points of view regarding this issue, and they reinforce it by the use of appealing to prophecy, by appealing to prayer, and that gives them an aura of authority and this kind of mystical power in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. And again, and appealing to mystical power because they don't have institutional power.
Correct.
Okay. Now here's the man himself, John Henry Weston, and he is going to explain to us how the SSPX is going to justify consecrating bishops.
Mandate. So in our ongoing coverage of the Society of St. Pius X decision to consecrate new bishops on July the 1st without papal approval, the SSPX has laid out a pathway to stop such bishops' consecrations without papal approval. The answer comes in a reply to the intervention of Cardinal Robert Sarah, the African cardinal, who is the former head of the Congregation for Divine Worship. In his intervention, Cardinal Sarah urged the SSPX to obey Leo XIV and stop.
I just want to highlight that this is actually really important that Cardinal Sarah came out and did this, because the SSPX has a real problem, because they believe two contradictory things. One, they believe that there is no salvation outside of the Catholic Church, and they believe that they don't need to listen to the Pope about anything. So that means that if Leo won't give them more bishops, when their current bishops die, they either have to hope that the new pope, whoever that is, will give them bishops eventually, which is extremely unlikely, or they have to pick up a couple of at least a couple cardinals who are willing to agree with John Henry Weston, say Leo's an anti-pope and we're going to have a 2 or 3 man conclave and pick a new pope. Now, one of the people, because Robert Sarah is an African bishop, he's from Guinea, and he is extraordinarily conservative on almost every topic, and was one of the cardinals that the traditional Catholics were really, really hoping would be elected pope. He wasn't. So I imagine that Weston might have been hoping that Sarah would be willing to follow the SSPX into schism. He's not. And that's important because so far, nobody, there haven't been any cardinals have directly come out in favor of the SSPX. and Sarah and Mueller, who were the two most likely suspects, have both told the SSPX to sit down and shut up. So part of what's going on here is reporting the news, and also part of what's going on here is really hoping that somebody changes their mind.
Their planned consecrations on July the 1st. The official response from the SSPX was authored by African SSPX priest Father Etienne Genoux and was published publicly in numerous places, as was the intervention of Cardinal Sarah. So here's what Father Genoux said regarding stopping the SSPX from doing bishops' consecrations without papal mandate. He, in fact, put the ball, as you might say, back in Cardinal Sarah's court. And I quote, "Your Eminence, we beg you to use your authority, your reputation, and your pen to convince the Holy Father to put an end to the doctrinal, moral, and liturgical crisis through which the Holy Church is passing. Then," he says, "then the Society of St. Pius X will no longer be compelled to ordain bishops without papal mandate. Then there will be true unity and perfect communion in the Church of God, unity and communion in the faith," end quote. The SSPX response also outlined the various elements of the crisis. Father Genoux writes, and I quote again, "The remedy proposed by His Eminence to those who wish to fight for the Catholic faith, Catholic morality, and liturgical tradition is attachment to the successor of Peter." He continues, "Every Catholic, therefore, should accept what comes from the Pope without ever disobeying. However," adds Father Genoux, "however, this is not as simple as it seems, for it is precisely from Rome that we have recently witnessed the opening of the Eucharistic communion to remarried divorcees, the blessing of irregular couples, the assertion that God wills religious pluralism, the questioning of titles traditionally attributed to the Blessed Virgin Mary and used by many popes, and even attempts to phase out the traditional missal," end quote. So finally, here they give the rationale of the SSPX as explained by Father Genoux. And I quote again, "Cardinal Sarah himself has opposed many of these innovations in the name of tradition."
So Aldo, did you hear anything on that list that couldn't be summarized as "we want to be bigots and you won't let us"? I mean, I'm genuinely asking because that was what I was hearing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like how could I say it? Trying to justify they're giving their discourse a structure in order to make it sound legitimate.
Yeah,
Because if it were just complaining, you could just brush it off
yeah,
right away. But they have to go through this process to make it more intellectually structured, to give it coherence and give it power in a sense.
yeah, exactly. And also, a lot of these people will do like they're also really good at throwing out a slippery slope argument. So it's like, okay, we're not going to use this title for the Virgin Mary. What's next? Banning the rosary?
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, that's not going to happen. It's just like, it's not going to happen. Like, I have heard Pope Leo with his own mouth, like telling people to pray the rosary, like constantly. It's like if you walk up to any Catholic clergyman and you say, "Should I pray the rosary?" the answer will be yes. Like,
Mhm.
Tradition. And Father Genoux adds, on the one hand, he shows us, speaking of Cardinal Sarah, on the one hand, he shows us the example of the good fight for the faith, Catholic morality, and liturgical tradition. And on the other hand, he invites us to obey the.
It should also be mentioned that when Francis was Pope, Cardinal Sarah had would use his Twitter account to randomly repost things from the Vatican account with an eye roll emoji. He wouldn't say anything. He would just roll his eyes. Which, which I mean, okay, to be fair, like when you're a cardinal and your job is to advise the Pope, you're like Cardinal Sarah has the right to roll his eyes at the Pope. That's even part of his job. But at the end of the day, he's still going to listen to the Pope.
Those who are at the root of the very evils we are battling. How can this be done when cardinals can spread heterodox opinions, opinions condemned by the Guinean cardinal himself, without ever being corrected by church authorities? He continues, what conclusion can we draw? If not, that before giving our assent, we must distinguish between teachings faithful to the perennial faith and those that express a new way of thinking, irreconcilable.
Yes, but see who gets to decide what's continuity and what's not? It's like it's like it's almost like KJV only Protestants, except they're like, like Council of Trent only Protestant, only Catholics. It's like, but they want to just throw out, okay, anything before Vatican II we like, except for the stuff that we don't like. It's like they want to be able to pick and choose and pick and choose and pick and choose. And at the same time, delegitimize other Catholics who also want to disagree with the church about one or two things. Except, it's becoming increasingly obvious that they don't just disagree about one or two things, they disagree about like everything. Which is fine. You can disagree. Just, don't try to go, okay, but we're right, so you should just give us bishops.
With previous magisterium, he says, although the current pope has only recently assumed the papacy, his appointments to the highest offices, as well as his speeches and homilies, do not suggest any significant change. End quote. Be sure to stay tuned to Side of the Cross Media and LifeSite News for all of your news on life, family, faith, and freedom.
Okay, I should mention that part of the reason why Leo has not been part of the reason why Leo's appointments have been in continuity with Francis's appointments is largely because under Francis, Leo was the head of the dicastery for bishops for the last 2 years of the Francis papacy. So therefore, anybody who was already like in the pipeline to be consecrated as a bishop is somebody that Pope Leo had himself like been speaking to this person, been reading their files, been talking to people that they had served with in various capacities, right? So yeah, Leo's appointments are going to look the same because he used to be the guy that was doing that job, right? It's like, yeah. Okay, I just want to close out with a few more minutes of Anthony Stein because he's telling us what Strickland had to say. And after, seeing Strickland being asked to give a prayer and giving, 25 minutes about how he's right and everybody else is wrong, we know it's going to be, well, it's going to be something.
Well, Bishop Strickland published one at perfect time for that. He's drawing a line in the sand on the SSPX question. Here's Bishop Strickland in his own words. Every Texan knows the story. Long before we knew about politics, before we knew the arguments, before we knew how to quibble over details, we were taught something in school that shaped our bones. At the Alamo, there came a moment when there were no more letters to send, no reinforcements coming, no negotiations left to try. The enemy was at the gates. Surrender had been demanded, and everyone knew what surrender would mean. So the commander, William Barrett Travis, gathered his men, not to inspire them, not to give a pep talk, but to tell them the truth. He drew a line in the dirt. On one side of that line was safety, at least for the moment. On the other side was almost certain death. And he said, in effect, choose. Only one man stepped back, the rest stepped forward. That line in the sand was not drawn to start a rebellion. It was drawn to end illusions. Crossing it did not guarantee victory. It guaranteed fidelity. And whether we like it or not, that is where the church stands right now. The church is in an emergency, not an emergency invented by commentators.
Okay, so now we're not only comparing the current state of the Catholic Church to, the church fathers and the persecution of the early church and the, and basically saying that the current situation is basically equivalent to, like, what if Valentinus had been elected Pope, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now we're comparing it to the Alamo. The Alamo. My dude.
What comes next?
Yeah, it's like, literally, what comes next? Because, like, let's keep in mind the reason for the Texas War of Secession, at least on the part of the Americans, was because slavery had been abolished in Mexico, and it is very difficult to raise cotton as a cash crop without slaves, which is a very good argument for not raising cotton as a cash crop unless you have, like, either machines or cotton is really, really expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like, so the idea that, again, I'm not going to say that Alamo apologists are more wrong than Crusade apologists, but, maybe, like, maybe don't celebrate the Alamo. Just maybe. I mean, I should mention that, when they're listing the Alamo survivors, generally people like Bishop Strickland don't mention the fact that when the Alamo was taken, there were 2 enslaved men who were there, who were freed by the Mexican army. And I mean, I'm not gonna, say that Santa Anna was a great guy, because he wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
But, at least he did that. Just saying.
But that is the idea behind these comparisons, because they have to resort into these highly emotional episodes in history
Yeah.
to to make people react. So that is the reason they do that, because they don't want to, or they can't convince people through reason, and they try to use emotion.
Yeah. Well, emotion, and also like telling really compelling narratives that have just enough detail in them to sound convincing.
Mhm.
So let's just have a few more. Let's just
Not a mood manufactured by
finish
social
feeding
media,
out.
not hysteria. A real emergency measured not in feelings, but in facts. An emergency measured by silence where there must be answers. Intolerance where there must be correction. And
I'm going to skip a little bit of the ranting.
Okay.
suspect. And fidelity is portrayed as rigidity, while error is praised as pastoral sensitivity. It is about a moment when the things the church once defended without apology must now justify their existence. When the preservation of the priesthood is treated as optional, when the formation of priests is obstructed, when the ordinary means of apostolic continuity are quietly denied. And at that point, the line is already being drawn, not by agitators, not by rebels, but by reality itself. At the Alamo, one man stepped back. His name was Moses Rose. History does not mock him. It simply records the choice. That is what lines do. They do not condemn, they reveal. The line does not create courage or cowardice. It exposes it. And the line the church faces today is not asking who is angry, who is loud, or who is popular. It is asking who is willing to remain faithful when fidelity costs something, because there are.
And that's where I think we can quit responding to videos for the day and just say that, in a way, Strickland's right. Because the SSPX has drawn a line in the sand. And they've created a situation where people whose belief that ecumenicism can and should consist of saying Lutherans are heretics, submit to Rome, or we'll light you on fire, is a compelling argument. Or, telling Jews and Muslims convert or die is appropriate behavior. When, doing the things that were done to Native people in the Americas to force them to convert would be considered acceptable. And the Catholic Church has decided that that's not okay. And the Catholic Church has decided that it's more important to invest, that it's not important to invest a whole lot of time and resources into making sure that everybody can understand Latin. And it's also actually worth mentioning that, like Schneider, basically he's a scholar of patristics, right? So when you ask a scholar of, it would be like if someone were to send Marcus Vincent an email and tell him, please defend the exclusive right of the Pope to appoint bishops using historical sources, I'm not sure if he would laugh or cry or call you an idiot. He would probably just think, oh my God, is this person just out of touch with reality or hopelessly uneducated? Because it's true. Historically, the Pope hasn't always had the exclusive right to ordain bishops. I mean, historically, like, the Pope was just the Bishop of Rome. If you go back far enough, at some point, well, I mean, even if you want to buy the Catholic argument that Peter was the first Pope, originally the Pope was like just some Jewish guy who couldn't even get Paul to agree with him.
Very enough, yes.
Yeah, I mean, but the point is that the church changes and the church grows, and at a certain point, people just have to decide, are they willing to grow and change with the church? And are they willing, or are they willing to stay in the church and make sure that the church doesn't go too far in one direction or the other? Because, like personally, I'm okay with a church where I'm at one end of the spectrum and Athanasius Schneider is at the other end of the spectrum. Because there's a lot that we can, because, he and I can sit down and talk all day about how awesome Teresa of Lisieux is and how cool the Real Presence is. And also, like, Schneider actually is not a traditional Latin Mass guy, because Schneider will point out that even the traditional Latin Mass includes Aramaic and Hebrew and Greek in some of the prayers. And for him, it's actually more important to preserve the Hebrew and the Greek and the Aramaic than it is to have the stuff that's around those prayers be in Latin, which again is showing how fractured the right is. And there's actually a really good chance that Schneider, when Leo tells him to sit down and shut up, will say, "Yes, Your Holiness, I will sit. I have said my piece, and now I will do what I'm supposed to do." And what is going to be very interesting is to see what happens on July 1st, when people have the option of saying, no, the real Catholic Church is all of these, little SSPX missions all over the country, mostly based in the United States and Europe. And, and seeing if they can pick up like some of the other sedevacantist and schismatic Catholic groups. Which is kind of what I want to close on, because one thing that was really interesting to me was when I went and looked up out of curiosity, checked the Wikipedia page on sedevacantism. The English page, at least, has been heavily edited to make it sound like it was basically some like slightly like that it was basically a movement that started in Mexico that was like maybe got a little bit out of control and maybe got a little culty in a way, but was fundamentally like not that different from, say, the Legionaries of Christ. And that's a really dangerous and really and that's a really dangerous argument, because it has the potential to persuade people who maybe, aren't aware that this started with a weird conspiracy theory about the Freemasons forcing the right person not to accept the papacy. And, so it's going to be really interesting to see which traditional Catholics stay in and which ones stay out. And also, say, the SSPX, if they can make common cause with sedevacantist groups like the Palmarian Catholic Church, which is a group that actually has an anti-pope in Spain. They have a cathedral and they have a pope who has a little pope crown, and there's only a few thousand people that even acknowledge them. But they might actually pick up support from the SSPX. I don't know. Basically what I'm trying to say is, if you are interested in church history, and if you are interested in the period of church history where you had groups, like groups that were making equal and contradictory claims to represent orthodoxy, well, pop some popcorn and get ready, because after July 1st, things could get really interesting or not. The SSPX could just, decide to not go into schism, or people could decide to just not follow the SSPX, and in 30 years, this won't be a problem. We don't know, but it'll be fun to find out. Did you have anything else you wanted to say in closing?
No.
Okay. So in other words, I would just like to close by saying something to, by speaking to my fellow Catholics who consider themselves traditional Catholics, speaking to them in their own chosen phrase: submit to Rome. And everybody else, have a nice day. Okay. And I'm just going to leave the meeting.
Sure.
So bye.